We did have some problems with the recording in our main service, so this is a re-recording for the virtual worship service. And today's passage is from 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. For you know that we dealt with each of you as a father deals with his own children, encouraging, comforting, and urging you to live lives worthy of God, who calls you into his kingdom and glory. Today is Father's Day, so happy Father's Day. You know, if you're curious, the history of Father's Day is that several dads saw people celebrating Mother's Day and said, hey, me too. Okay, obviously it's a little more complicated than that, but surprisingly not that much more complicated. This has been a strange year. The COVID-19 pandemic has forced us to have virtual services for about 3 months, so we were not able to worship together on Mother's Day. So today, on Father's Day, we are going to celebrate both Father's Day and Mother's Day together. Mother's Day has a rich history. The celebration of mothers goes back to the ancient Greeks and Romans who held festivals to pagan gods of motherhood. The modern celebration of Mother's Day probably owes more to an early Christian ceremony called Mothering Sunday. On that day, Christians went back to their mother church, that is, the church that they were raised in. Eventually, this also became a celebration of human mothers, and children would bring their mothers presents, usually flowers. Oh, from there, fast forward to West Virginia, 1868. The Civil War had just ended, and Confederate soldiers and Union soldiers, abolitionists and former slave owners and free slaves were all trying to live together, if not happily, then at least peacefully. And a few women, led by Ann Jarvis, wanted to have a celebration that the entire community could get behind. And they realized that everyone, from every culture and every background, loves their mothers and wants to celebrate their moms. They also realized that if your mom tells you to be nice to the guy down the street, no matter how old you are, you're going to be nice to the guy down the street, at least as long as mom's watching. And so Mother's Day was born. And it was Ann's daughter, Anna, who led the charge to create a national holiday in 1914 out of Mother's Day. Father's Day, by comparison, has kind of a boring history. Mother's Day had been celebrated for several years, and people realized that they should also celebrate fathers. And so various Father's Day traditions started to crop up, but there was no consistency. When you celebrated Father's Day depended on where you were in the country. Then in 1972, Richard Nixon, in the midst of a bitter re-election campaign, declared Father's Day a national holiday on the third Sunday of June. And so today we celebrate our fathers. And to do that, I want to look at what the Apostle Paul had to say about fatherhood. And well, I'm going to focus on fathers mainly. I think everything that I say applies equally well to mothers. Today we're turning to 1 Thessalonians. Now, Paul had started the church in Thessalonica during his second missionary journey. And he met with great success there. However, quick success means quick opposition. After about 3 weeks, the town was ready to riot, and Paul had to flee under cover of darkness. But he worried about the church in Thessalonica. He worried that they thought he was a con man who had come in to get what he wanted and then disappeared in the middle of the night. So he sent Timothy back to check on the church there. And Timothy returned with a good report. The church was thriving, and they were anxious to hear from Paul again. In response to that, Paul wrote what we now call the letter of 1 Thessalonians. And in this letter, Paul described himself as a father to the Thessalonians. He wrote that he spent his time comforting and encouraging and urging them to live lives worthy of God, who calls them into his kingdom and his glory. And describing fatherhood, Paul tells us several important things about being a parent. First, Paul tells us the goal of fatherhood. Being a father is about more than just having fun. Being a father is about more than just making sure the kids survive to adulthood. Though in my house, sometimes I feel that if everybody's alive at bedtime, it's been a successful day. But Paul gives us a greater goal for fatherhood. Paul wrote that the goal of a father is to raise children who live lives worthy of God, who calls them into his kingdom and glory. So fathers, mothers, that is your job. That is your vocation. That is your assignment. That is your mission. To raise children who live lives worthy of God, who calls them into his kingdom and his glory. And that is a big assignment. I think sometimes we underestimate the value of parents, particularly if someone chooses to be mainly a parent and not work outside of the home. Then we say that person is just a father or just a mother. But this underestimates the awesome responsibility of a parent. Being a parent makes someone the biggest influence on a person's faith in life. As countless studies have confirmed, the Bible has always taught us. Raise a child up in the right way to go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. Studies have found that when both parents are active in the church, and there's a 95% chance that their child will be active in the church throughout most of his or her life. At the same time, recent studies have found that if neither parent is active in the church, even if they say they are Christians, but are not active in their faith, then there's an 80% chance the child will not be active in the church and may not even claim to have any faith in God. This means that being a parent makes you the single most important influence in your child's faith. It means that a parent takes on personal responsibility for their child's eternal salvation. And that's a heavy thing for me to say. As I've often said, we are not responsible for other people. I cannot force anyone into the faith. Everyone is responsible for their own relationship with the living God. However, other than God himself, a parent is the number one influence on a child's faith in life. So, considering this awesome responsibility that parents have, let's look at what Paul says a parent does. What are the characteristics of a good parent? And Paul tells us three things. He says that he, serving as a parent to the Thessalonians, spent his time comforting, encouraging, and urging them to live lives worthy of God, who calls them into his kingdom and his glory. I want to look at each of those three things. First, Paul says that he spent his time encouraging the Thessalonians. A parent encourages. We encourage our children, and our children in many ways rise or fall based on our encouragement. Another preacher by the name of Melvin Newland once told a story about a young boy in school, and he had failed several math tests. And one day a teacher sent a note home to his father saying, "Your son cannot handle math." And the father read the note, looked over his son, and said, "Son, I guess you just don't have an aptitude for math." Well, the boy continued to fail math tests for years. Then one day, a teacher put a math problem up on a board, and she asked the class to solve the problem. And for a while, nobody could. And the boy looked at the board and realized that he did know the answer. And so he timidly raised his hand, and a few people kind of laughed at him because everybody knew he couldn't do math. But the boy stood up, he went to the board, he worked the problem, and he came to the right answer. And later he said, I realized that it wasn't that I didn't have an aptitude for math, it was that everyone said I couldn't do it, so I didn't even try. Parents, our children believe that they can do what we believe they can do. In a very real and practical way, your child's success and your child's character are built on your faith in your child. So we encourage our children. Second, we comfort our children. A parent comforts. Jesus Christ is our great comforter. But we are the body of Christ. That means that what God does in this world, he does through us. The actress, Anne Gilbert, once told a story about how her 4-year-old was afraid of the dark. And so each night, to comfort the child, she and her husband would tell their daughter that God was always watching over her. Then, one night, after Anne had gone to bed, she felt a gentle touch and heard a small, familiar voice say, Mommy, I know God's with me, but I need somebody with skin. That's what it means to be the body of Christ. For us to be the body of Christ means that we are God's skin. We are the comfort our children receive. And for our children to know that God will comfort them first, they have to experience our comfort. Ryder Stevenson once described a ship that was caught in a terrible storm and was being blown towards a rocky shore that would sink the ship and kill everyone on board. And in the midst of this storm, one of the passengers, against orders, took the dangerous walk across the deck to the pilot house. And he saw the captain lashed to the wheel of the ship. And the captain noticed the passenger was there, looked over, and smiled. And then went back to his work of inch by inch, bringing the ship back out to sea. Well, this passenger made his way back to the others. And he said to the other passengers, I have seen the captain. And he smiled. All is well. Being a parent does not mean that you'll always have all the answers. It does not mean that you're never going to make a mistake. It does not mean that you're never going to get scared or confused or lost. What it does mean is that you are the reassuring smile and the calm voice when your child is scared or confused or lost. A parent comforts. Third and finally, a parent urges. This one can be a little tricky, because what does it mean to urge our children? There's an old story about a jockey who was winning a lot of horse races. And one day a reporter noticed that before the beginning of the race, the jockey would lean over and appear to say something to the horse. And after the jockey won another race, the reporter went over and said, what was going on here? What were you doing? And the jockey said, oh, well, before each race, I like to whisper a poem into the horse's ear. And the reporter said, well, that's really neat. What poem do you say? And the jockey said, roses are red, violets are blue. Horses that don't win get turned into glue. Sometimes I think that that's what we think of as urging. That is, it's to threaten. It's saying, I'm going to turn you into glue. But there has to be a better way. I think that better way can be found by looking at the Greek word that Paul used, which is translated as urge. It's the word martyrio. It means to bear witness. It's the word that we also get the English word from, martyr. So, how do we bear witness to our children? Well, the simple and obvious answer is we live it. We give our children an up-close, personal example of what it means to live a life worthy of God who calls us into his kingdom and his glory. Now, sometimes parents get the strange idea that their children learn how to live by listening to what their parents say. The biblical witness, countless studies, and basic common sense all tell us that's not right. Our children don't live how to learn from what we say. They live how to learn from what we do. They live how to learn from how we live. So, if we spend our time in prayer and our children see us praying, then they will know that prayer is an important part of life. If we do not spend our time praying, then our children will see that prayer doesn't really matter in life. And our children are always watching. Even if it feels like they're not watching, they are always watching. So if we go to church every Sunday, we are telling our children that worship with other Christians matters. If we are steadfast in honesty, even when it's embarrassing or makes us uncomfortable, then our children learn that honesty is important in life. If we show compassion, even to people who might resent it, or might not appreciate that compassion, but who still need it, when we show that compassion, then our children learn that having compassion on others is important in life. Our children don't learn how to live from what we say. They learn how to live from what we do. And to urge our children is not something done with words. We urge our children with our lives. Today is Father's Day. We celebrate our fathers on this day. And as we have this celebration, let us remember that we have a Father in heaven. And let us live lives that comfort and encourage and urge our children to live lives worthy of God, who calls them into his kingdom and into his glory. May God be with you, and I will see you tomorrow.